You're now live.
We are live, and as this is Senate Finance, this is Friday and April 29th already. And no, that is next week's agenda, Faith. I'm not talking to you and brought up next week's agenda. So let me get this week's up. All right. I'm working on next week's. All right.
For a second.
I've got it. Today is the 23rd. I thought the 29th sounded a little fast. Committee and Faith, remind me at the end, we have a whole bunch of government appointments, no commissioners or secretaries, but we need to get them distributed and worked on because we're reaching the time where they'll just be, approved en masse. So remind me of that. And we do have, for anyone that wasn't here, I think a clear path forward on S88. So we'll take that up at the end today. But we're going to go back to H360, which is broadband and net neutrality. And Joshua Diamond is here with us. If you remember, was it 5 years ago? A number of years ago, the legislature passed a bill saying that in order to do business with the state, an internet provider had to guarantee net neutrality. That ran into all kinds of national legal proceedings, and we shelved it, I believe. I'm not sure what the legal term is, but we did not go forward with it. There's a lot of talk in broadband about net neutrality and open access and how much authority we have. So Josh, we thought we'd ask you to give us maybe an update of the status of lawsuits and what kind of, how wide is our window here?
Madam Chair, members of the committee, Joshua.
Josh, you're going to have to get a little closer to the mic because we can't hear you.
Okay, is this better?
Little, you're still pretty faint.
Huh.
I think my hearing's still all right.
I'm just wondering what could be causing the problem, but let me try moving the speaker. How about that? Does that help?
That's good. Yep.
So, Madam Chair, members of the committee, Joshua Diamond, Deputy Attorney General, if helpful, I could maybe just roll back to the history of about 2018 and talk a little bit about what gave rise, I believe, to the legislation, and then talk about the status of the litigation here in Vermont, if that's helpful.
Okay.
So, going back to 2018, but maybe as a precursor to that, let me just acknowledge that I think
Senator Pearson has a question.
I just want to jump in. Litigation is sort of important in a context, but we're really exploring now is as we offer broadband build out grants, are we within our right to say, if you want a grant, you have to adhere to principles of net neutrality? So I don't want to. The history is important in the context of that question, less about just an update from where I'm coming from anyway.
I think that's the base question, and as much history, not everybody was here for the history. So as much history as it will take us to understand our powers and limitations.
Can I raise just another issue? I think we're really talking about two things. We're talking about net neutrality in the sense that we have previously, but what we're also talking about is if we have a CUD, for example, or let's say a legacy provider that receives money from the state, do they have to open up that fiber to others on a rental basis at fair market value as far as that new added fiber partially paid for with state funds? So I think those are two slightly different questions.
Yeah, one is, I think, more open access.
Correct. And could arrange as part of the contract as under which we grant state funding.
So I think the short answer is I don't know sitting here today. I have not researched these questions. Wasn't frankly, I thought you were looking for a history of the litigation and the current status of the litigation. The statute talks about anytime state government contracts for broadband internet access service. So, issues that would have to be researched would be, is a grant a contract? Is the contract that is contemplated with the CUDs fall within the definition of Act 169? And, my understanding of open access really is based upon my prior career as general counsel for Washington Electric in dealing with transmission tariffs. So I have not looked at that question within the context of fiber cable and broadband services. So I just don't know the answers to those questions today because I haven't researched them. So my apologies to all, but I don't have answers for you on those today.
Okay. I think open access, we've talked about both net neutrality and open access. And I think we've really talked more about open access, that anyone could rent fiber. I suppose if you've rented the fiber, yeah, would they have to abide by net neutrality? So that would be our question. And it would, I mean, these are local CUDs, so they would be intrastate. Okay, I see Senator Sirotkin and then Senator McDonald.
So Josh, I apologize. You're getting a lot of questions before you even get a word out, but I was interested in having Josh come in and asked for his appearance because I felt on the net neutrality issue, we had a law that passed that it seemed to me that if the law was effective, that net neutrality would be a requirement in any contract or grant we gave out, but the litigation and the law, its effectiveness has been put on hold for many years. So that's why I wanted to know the status of that litigation. And if it was no longer on hold, would there be could we impose a requirement of net neutrality? And even if it was on hold, could the governor insist on net neutrality in contracts going forward that he may, or we could insist upon it through legislation at this point?
And
So I, for one, I asked the chair to have him in so we could figure out where we are in the law from a few years ago and where that law stood right now.
And I think that's what Josh is prepared to do, and that's what we will give him time to do. Senator McDonald, did you have a question?
Yes, we're struggling with looking to find out what the law in the past has restricted or called for, and I suggest that we ask the witness what is it that we would seek to be able to do, and how might the law be crafted to permit that. And we are struggling with how we will provide state grants to build broadband out into areas that are underserved or without service. And we have many applicants. And how might we, if we also have a notion of how CUDs operate, which is they build out and they provide services to the people in their areas. And we have for-profit companies that want to build out to those would seek to build out to those same areas with state money. How do we treat them both those applicants to be eligible for money and can have them conform to our criteria for receiving the money. How do we legally say, well, if you CUDs or you municipals or you other people want to build a level of service out into the countryside, and if you make a commitment to serve the people that you are, the cooperatives and the CUDs and the municipalities serve at a certain level without certain profits, that you are welcome to the money. How do we offer the for-profits the same conditions? Say you too will be permitted to have money to build out into similar areas with similar technologies with state money, provided that the people in those areas will get the same benefits as the people in the areas with the CUDs. How do we craft something, whether it's net neutrality or simply a level of, well, 100,
I think-
100 for both cases? That's our,
I think
believe
net
that's our challenge.
neutrality is the only thing Mr. Diamond is prepared to talk to us about. And as far as I know, 100, 100 or 25, 3 is not the subject of litigation, which is why the net neutrality has become an issue, because there's court cases. So I
Yes,
think if
you
he can,
absolutely
yeah,
have
he can
to,
ask, he
because-
can,
because
I-
those numbers are, everybody knows what the numbers mean, and net neutrality, or something net neutrality light or net neutrality similar. How
yes.
could we create something that uses a different word to achieve our objectives? So thank you. That's it.
Okay, I'm gonna get all the questions out and then give the witness a chance to answer them. Okay, Senator Bray.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think I have a question similar to Senator McDonald's, but from a slightly different angle. And that is, to the extent that we are offering grants to recipients and there's nothing mandatory about applying for a grant, and we're not imposing conditions on existing contracts or service, does that give us more latitude than we would have otherwise? Because this is a voluntary arrangement. If you want the money, you need to make the conditions. So they're application requirements. And I don't know if that nuance means that we could do things in this granting process that we might not be able to do more broadly, like in Act 169.
Okay, the floor is yours, Mr. Diamond.
Lots of great questions. And again, I don't think I honestly have answers for you at this time.
Okay, we're still having trouble hearing you.
Certainly. I'm not sure I have answers at this time for the underlying questions. They may involve further analysis of the statute. And I frankly would defer to the experts on those issues, which really may be the Department of Public Service. But what I can tell you is whether or not Act 169 is operational. And that has been the subject of the litigation that we've been involved with for a long time now. So going back just a little bit, just to frame the context, in 2018, the FCC reversed course and ended net neutrality by an order issued by the FCC. Vermont and a number of other states, along with some industry players, sued the FCC to reverse course. And that was an important piece of litigation because not only did the FCC reverse course, but it also said that it was expressly preempting the field by where the states could regulate. In response, Vermont not only litigated, but you all as a legislature passed Act 169 that in essence said, if the state is going to contract for internet service, then we are going to ask for a certification from the internet service provider to certify that they're acting consistent with net neutrality. And then we got sued shortly thereafter. This is late 2018. And we felt in consultation, frankly, with legislative leadership that since there were significant questions outstanding that we were litigating already in the DC circuit about preemption, that we would mitigate our risk in Vermont in the potential for attorney's fees and see what the outcome of that litigation would be. And so that played itself out through 2019. And then by early 2020, we had a decision by the DC circuit that actually happened at the end of 2019. And then the appeal processes had run their course. And what happened at that point was California was getting sued as well by some of the same industry players that are suing Vermont. And California has a broader law. It's not just a market-based a set of statutes that conditions what the state may do in its contracting authority, but it says we are requiring essentially all those providing internet service to abide by the net neutrality principles. They were sued as well on preemption issues, similar claims that were being raised against Vermont. And again, the feeling was that given that we had no consumer complaints about impacts on net neutrality, and that this case could be instructive on what may happen in Vermont, we thought it would be best to let that play itself out. And we stayed, again, implementation and the litigation. That stay essentially expires today. We've been in discussions with the plaintiffs in the case to allow us to essentially put back into our contracts going forward the certification requirements, but wait another 6 months or wait to hear what the Ninth Circuit does so that we might have greater clarity, or in the alternative, we may have a change with the FCC. The chairman of the FCC resigned his post back in January of 21, shortly after the election. And I don't know the current status of the Senate hearings, but that position is ready to be reappointed. And one might speculate that with a new appointment under the new administration, there could be a reversal of the 2018 order, and net neutrality may reappear as the law of the land, if you will. So that's where we're at. We're trying to walk that balance in discussions. I don't have a result for you to report today that will allow for implementation, but maybe staying the enforcement pending what happens at the Ninth Circuit or a change at the FCC. Yes, Senator. Oh, I'm sorry.
Senator Brock.
With respect to the plaintiffs who have sued Vermont in the net neutrality case, are there any names of those plaintiffs that we would recognize quickly and easily?
If you give me a moment, I will pull up the list if that's helpful. They're essentially trade associations: American Cable Association, NECTA, the Internet and Television Association of New England Cable and Telecommunications, US Telecom, and the Broadband Association on behalf of their members.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Senator Sirotkin.
Thank you, Josh. I'm a little unclear what you just said translates to. You're saying that they may agree to sign a certification, but as part of that, you agree not to enforce the certification if somebody makes a complaint? Is that what that means?
That would be the balance pending the outcome of either the Ninth Circuit ruling on the California net neutrality legislation or November 15th, which we are thinking is a good timetable to see whether or not the FCC changes course.
So how is that different than just agreeing to another 6 month stay?
Because contracts going forward would then have the language and the certification process so that after November 15th, if there was a violation, action could be taken on that contract.
And otherwise, if you just agreed to a stay, any contract signed between now and November 15th wouldn't have any retroactive retroactive impact. Net neutrality wouldn't have a retroactive impact on those contracts. So we can sweep the ones in between now and then if it turns out that we can do that. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Senator Bray.
Mr. Diamond, do you have any, I know that you didn't prepare on this questions, but do you have any sense of whether or not net neutrality, in this case, serves as some sort of proxy for judging how open access might be assessed?
Wouldn't want to speculate on that. I have some vague understanding of open access in the context of electricity tariffs, but I'm not sure how it applies under these circumstances here.
Sure. Okay. Thanks.
All right, Senator Pearson.
I think it's my understanding that something like open access is totally different because it's not, been the source of federal policy. But Josh, on the principle of a state grant outlining certain conditions, as Senator Bray said earlier, it's a voluntary, nobody's forced to accept grant money. Does that, and I appreciate you want to research and unfortunately we're going to need some input on that pretty quick, and that's never handy for your office. But the principle of us stipulating grant conditions in order to be a recipient of a grant, doesn't that in general give us pretty broad authority to purchase and build whatever we want with our grants?
So there is a concept this is kind of con law dealing with the Commerce Clause. One of the challenges that have been made in the litigation is a dormant Commerce Clause challenge. The idea being Congress has the authority to regulate commerce amongst the states. And there's a doctrine that comes out of it called the Dormant Commerce Clause that limits what the states can do in impacting commerce, interstate commerce. One exception that is generally recognized is the market participant rule, that the government as a market participant, as a contracting party, can set conditions. And that analysis can get further complicated, if you will, in the sense of, do the market conditions that are being exercised by the terms of the contract really just relate to the parties of that contract, the state and the counterparty, or is it really a proxy for something else, creating a broader regulatory scheme?
It sounds like the best that can be said now is we're on shaky ground. The ground may become more firm once there is a new chairman of the FCC, once things are worked out. But for now, unless you can, do some research and find out what's going on, the whole issue of if we are contracting, and actually we are contracting with the CUDs in most circumstances, I think, they will be contracting with a service provider. So there's more than one level of contracting going on here. And it doesn't sound like there's a clear or bright line. So Senator Bray.
Mr. Diamond, so on the Commerce Clause or Dormant Commerce Clause, I'm just trying to remember from running into this in some previous work on bills, is I thought that what the federal law was trying to prohibit was rules, for instance, that would unfairly advantage businesses in the state. So even though it was a regulation only within Vermont, it would create a distinct advantage for Vermont businesses in fulfilling those requirements. So that was the dormant piece. But if these are, I'm trying to imagine how that could be applied to this, because these are intrastate entities, and they're actually perhaps more burdensome than they are enabling or something. I mean, I don't know that anyone would ever argue it's an advantage to any CUD, for instance, to operate with both net neutrality and open access. So I don't know how we would fall victim to a claim of advantaging an in-state business. Then I guess the last piece of that is, does it apply to municipalities? The Commerce Clause, that is.
Commerce Clause, I think typically what you're getting at is the issue of interstate commerce. That's what the Dormant Commerce Clause is addressing one way or the other. And as you suggested, Senator Bray, or stated, that one of those doctrines is the idea of discriminating against out-of-state businesses trying to do business in the state of Vermont. That's one aspect of the doctrine. And I think the state generally has far more latitude to regulate when it's just intrastate activity. And certainly with municipalities, that would, without looking at it in depth, would seem to be intrastate related.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Senator Sirotkin.
So I'm just unclear. I understand what you've said so far, except to understand, is there any difference in the legal analysis of Act 169 as it applies to a grant versus a contract?
I don't have an opinion for you today, Senator Sirotkin, whether the language of the statute talks specifically about government contracts, and whether a government grant that you're contemplating would be considered a contract for purposes of the statute versus something different. I would need to give further consideration to.
So stated in the alternative, if we put out a grant and a company who didn't want to and insisted upon net neutrality, and a company didn't want to abide by net neutrality, it's theoretically possible that these same folks, if they were in that latter group, could sue us saying that's a violation of interstate commerce.
Hear that much better than we hear you, Senator. You're muted, Michael. Senator,
He's chastising his phone.
You're muted.
Trying to mute out my phone.
You muted the wrong thing. You're supposed to mute the phone.
Well, I don't know how to do that.
We're in charge of high tech.
So,
Yeah.
so anyhow,
This is scary.
I think you got my question. The grant would also be potentially the subject of a net neutrality lawsuit, saying that an interstate commerce by that proposal would also be violative of interstate commerce clause.
And I don't mean to be flip, but anyone can sue really over any theory. I guess I would have to have a better understanding of what the conditions of that grant would be
Okay,
to get a sense of that.
okay, thank you.
Okay, well, we're 1 minute overtime, so Senator Pearson, I think unless there's something
So-
vital, we're gonna wrap up.
Josh, how do you recommend we proceed? Because what we're doing is trying to create a framework for at least $100 million of grants to go out around the state to build broadband. And for many of us, we'd like to, in addition to stipulating, speeds and the requirement to build throughout a town or what have you, we'd like to insist on the principles of net neutrality. So, are you saying you shouldn't do that? Are you saying, give me a week and I'll tell you if you're smart to do that? I need some guidance here, or at least some expectation of when you might be able to follow up and give us some insight.
Let me just make sure I understand the question. The question is, if you all make a policy decision that you want to condition dollars for broadband build out for these grants that are contemplated, I guess, under the current legislation that you're looking at, could you condition that on net neutrality principles? And does that create risk of litigation to you? And how significant is that risk? Is that?
Sure. Yeah, I think so.
Josh, could we, since it sounds like things are in flux and we need to get the grants out, could we abide by the principles of net neutrality as far as legally possible? Or something to that way, if the law changes in 9 months and we get the contracts out in 6, we haven't got a bunch of contracts out there that don't require it.
I'm sure there's a way to create a savings clause that might.
Okay, that might be the best at this point, unless things move remarkably quickly. Senator Sirotkin and then Senator Bray.
Just very briefly following up on Senator Pearson's question, as you're about to enter into this stipulation for a continued stay subject to people agreeing that they would certify any contracts, could you expand that to say they would certify net neutrality as to any grants awarded to them?
So aside from the drafting question about whether or not the current legislation or statute covers the grants, which I think is a question that I'm not prepared to answer, but today at least. Again, I guess I'd like to see the full context of that.
Okay.
And it kind of goes back to Senator Pearson's question, which is what's the risk of litigation? Would we want that stay to extend to potentially new legislation? There's just a lot of variables there, Senator. So I'm just focused right now on Act 169 and whether or not that can be addressed.
Okay, any guidance you could give us would be appreciated. I think we should also remember the level of risk we might be willing to take might not be the same level of risk that any individual CUD is willing to take, because if there's a lawsuit, I guess if you went by deep pockets, they'd go after us, but there's nothing that says the CUD, who would be doing the actual contracting with the provider, is the one that's going to be requiring the net neutrality. So there's a lot of that. I think it's more complicated than that. I may be wrong, but we're going to have to move along. I've got Senator Bray because our next set of witnesses are here.
Hey, I'll try the novel approach going back to what Mr. Diamond actually came to talk to us about. What's the what's the likelihood that with a change of administration and a new FCC or whatever, a renewed FCC, that this will all be rendered moot because, well, net neutrality will be reinstated, and the preemption, they'll remove the preemption.
And that's essentially what we're trying to address for that possibility, that by
Right.
waiting 6 months before we enforce Act 169 would allow for that to happen. But we need to get the appointment. There's got to be a new administrative process for them to issue a new order. But we thought 6 months might be reasonable and not have an open-ended timeline so that there was more certainty for the state of Vermont.
Thank you.
Okay. Can we move along then to our next agenda item?
Thank you, Josh.
Thank you, Josh.
You're welcome.
And yeah, if you can give us any further enlightenment, that would be helpful. Okay. All right. We're going to move on. As we're going through this whole broadband bill, there's been a question about the telecom plan, which is in process. And I spoke to the commissioner, who is here as a listening partner today. If at all possible, the folks that are doing the plan have any preliminary thoughts that they could share with us so that as far as possible, we can have our broadband build out plan sync with what it looks like the telecom plan may come in recommending. So we're just, I think it's helpful just to know if we're all going in the same direction. And we've got Joanne Hovis. Joanne, I see her name, and Matt Dunn is here. Commissioner, did you want to do anything in the way of introduction, or you just, my chat said you were just a listening partner.
Madam Chair, I'm just going to listen. I know your time's at a premium, but I'm very pleased that Joanne and Matt were able to make it today. And please keep in mind the plan is still being written as we speak, but I think you'll find their testimony today is very helpful for the things that have been on the committee's mind. So Joanne, Matt, why don't you take it away?
And Joanne and Matt, this is your presentation. You can do it whatever way works for you. Within reason.
Sure, of course. Well, Madam Chair and members of the committee, delighted to be here. I wasn't sure exactly what the agenda was. I know that the committee has been doing a lot of work in understanding the parameters of the funding that you have. And we have, likewise, doing our diligence as part of this planning process. I want to perhaps I hope this isn't cold water, but we do have a process for doing this plan over a period of time, and we are knee deep in it right now, doing interviews, data analytics, analysis, and the like. And we are excited by that progress. But we don't have a lot to share right now because we wouldn't want to share something that, frankly, the additional research and outreach that we do would then, make us change it before our May 10th timeline for a draft. What I would certainly say is that we believe that this is a once in a lifetime opportunity that is before the state of Vermont, that the amount of resources just in the ARPA dollars could allow us to do the things that many of us have talked about for a long, long time. And that's both intimidating and exciting as we have that chance to be able to do that work. We do in the 10-year plan process that we are going through, we are leaning heavily on the issues around immediate concerns that we articulated in the COVID plan that we presented to the committee, I believe in January, and that we worked on last fall. And we are focusing on the longer term in the 10-year plan. We believe they are complementary. And I think everyone would love to do the immediate response combined with the longer term, hardening of the infrastructure so that we know that we've got the capacity to do things, do both of those. But that's how we're approaching this, really looking at the longer term pieces. So we're happy to answer any questions we have. We also would welcome questions that you all have that you would want to make sure were answered as part of a 10-year plan. I know that particularly Senator Brock has had a list of questions that he has referenced a few times, and at least the ones that we have picked up on from other conversations that have happened in this committee, we think those are good questions. And some we are in the process of addressing. Some are known knowns that we're happy to share if there are specific questions like, how many households on an estimated basis we think are currently unserved and things like that. But again, we welcome those questions, those thoughts, the kind of frameworks that you all are considering, all the way through to the kinds of values that folks feel are going to need to be a priority. I caught the tail end of the conversation about net neutrality with Josh Diamond, and we're certainly going to be providing some feedback from the legal counsel that we have on risk parameters. That work is not done yet, and again, we would not want to prematurely share findings that aren't ready for prime time.
Up and Senator Bray. I'm sorry, I'll do Senator Brock and then Senator Bray. I just don't register the little yellow hands.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Matt, I think you've probably seen many of my questions. Another document that I put out late yesterday, if you haven't seen it, I will send you a copy because I don't think it's on our site yet. Which just raising a lot of the questions for thoughts for discussion as to what we do and what we include in our decision-making process. Mm-hmm. To that end, I'm interested in some of the things that your report would at least address in terms of recommendations. And there, are you going to be looking at the area of who's in charge? And when I say who's in charge, I mean, what sort of a framework should we have if we want to be sure that we have broadband on a statewide basis being ubiquitous? Should there be some sort of a gatekeeper, overseer, or what have you? And who should that be? Is that an area that you're going to be touching on at all?
So that particular area was not in our original scope of work, right? And I assume you're talking about not things like funding through CUDs versus funding directly to provider, because that is certainly the kind of thing that we are diving into. But if the question is about the government apparatus that's involved in evaluating or holding accountable or anything else. That's not a core structure to it, because what we're trying to do is articulate, given the structure that we have now, what is the sequencing, what is the priority setting for the resources that are available now, and where should they go to make sure that you get to ubiquitous 100 over 100, as soon as possible, and certainly by 10 years. We're also looking into ensuring that mobile is also addressed as it moves along, and those other factors.
Are you looking at whether or not there ought to be any consistent standards or guardrails as far as internet expansion is concerned, where we're putting new money and new systems in place, whether or not there should be any consistency in what we do, or whether or not there should be, at least in terms of state-funded projects, a Wild West.
Yeah, Senator, I think what you'll find in our report, and these are things that we've been grappling with, is that there is a wide range of options that are available that sometimes affect the efficiency or the cost of deployment to be able to make connections. And there's certainly prioritization that can happen for which locations should have priority over others. So what you will see is an articulation of that tension. We will certainly come with our own, viewpoint on how those should be prioritized. But absolutely. Look, I mean, that's the real that's the real dynamic within this is how do you get it out there? What kind of service are you wanting to make sure is in place with more dollars, but still limited dollars? And then what are the conditions or values that go with that as it goes out? And then finally, what kind of prioritization and timeline to be associated with that? Again, there are different dynamics on the short-term connections than there are on longer-term connections, but all those are in there. Joanne?
Yeah, I'm sorry I interrupted you. I didn't mean to. If
Nope.
I could add to that, Senator, very much in alignment with what my colleague Matt has said, the report absolutely has standards and recommendations for technical standards from an engineering standpoint, from a public safety standpoint, from a resilience and long-term investment standpoint for what we recommend the state should be funding. So if you're making this investment, you ideally would like to make it only one time and not have to revisit it 7 years from now and have to make it again, which has been frequently the way the federal government does this, is sending out a whole lot of money and then realizing a few years later that what was built is not meeting needs and needs to be funded yet again. And there are standards in light of all of that there. And then given that this infrastructure will be critical to public safety, long-term resilience, support of a wide range of other kinds of applications, including healthcare and so on, standards are attuned to that as well. And our engineering team, which includes public safety experts, are working on that. Those standards will all be there. If I may also just address your earlier question with regard to gatekeepers, we're not recommending anything. As Matt said, that kind of prospect was not in our scope of work, but we do make recommendations about how the state can very efficiently put this money to work, because I know that's a key goal. And just working in states all over the country, that is a critical factor. This is, after all, stimulus funding. So the goal of creating jobs in the short term is there, as well as the goal of making sure that it secures the long-term broadband future of our communities. And how to get there as a matter of organization is one of the critical questions I'm seeing coming up in multiple states, including in Vermont. Our analysis is that standing up a new entity from scratch would be a very time-consuming matter. And we would recommend thinking about how you can leverage the investments you've already made as a state in expertise and capabilities within existing departments. And this is a conversation that I've had in multiple states in just the past week. Not only because it will take time to develop that expertise and even hire the leadership for a new entity, but also because a newly created entity does not have the benefits of experience making grants, the benefits of lawyers on staff who can review these things, the benefits of the ability to contract in an efficient way, all of the infrastructure of government that's going to be necessary to get what could be hundreds of millions of dollars of money out in an efficient and effective way, and then to oversee and make sure that that money is deployed and used well and to verify that the state gets what it was promised when it gave those grants out. All of that infrastructure is a critical piece of this. And to the extent you are able to leverage what you've already developed, we would really recommend it, because it could be a 6 to 12 month delay to stand up a new entity.
As part of your process in coming up with that type of recommendation, have you done an evaluation of the organization as it exists now in terms of whether or not it is capable of doing the things that you think it should be doing?
So, Senator, if you're asking whether we've audited any existing departments of Vermont government, no, we haven't. Multiple agencies of Vermont government would have the capabilities to do these things. This is what government does all the time. I would not. I'm not speaking to. There's no doubt in my mind that all 50 states have agencies and departments that are capable of doing this, because they fundamentally do. Federal money passes through, as well as state money passes through agencies of state government all the time. Grants are made, they're overseen, lawyers review the contracts. It's foundational to what we do at the state and local level within government. My point is not so much about the capabilities of any particular entity as it is about the challenges of standing up a new entity that has to develop all those capabilities on a very short timeline, during a time when there's enormous demand for that skill set and that expertise. To say, well, this is a whole different set of issues. There's a shortage in every way in the broadband ecosystem of what every entity in the broadband ecosystem needs, but that will include experienced folks who are able to oversee a broadband grant program within government. So I hope that answers your question.
So you have not actually looked at what the capabilities are of the organization that we have in place right now?
No, that was not what we were charged with doing.
Okay.
That's not the.
In terms of strategies,
I
between
think Matt may have had a
short-term,
further.
Oh, good.
I think
Oh,
you're
good.
all set. Okay. All right, go on.
in terms of strategies between the long-term strategy, which I think most will agree is an extension of fiber throughout, have you also, or will you also be reporting on a short-term strategy in order to get broadband to people quickly?
So I'll take this first, and then Joanne, please chime in. So we will certainly be addressing both in this draft broadband plan. What I will tell you is that in terms of number of inches of text in plan, it will be much smaller on the short term, largely because we'll be referencing a lot of the work that we did in the COVID emergency plan, which, while could have been acted upon with COVID dollars in that particular time frame, is also relevant. Things like distribution of hotspots, the broadband core, which I was delighted to see has been brought up again, because I do think that ongoing support is going to be important. Such things. So the focus of what we will be delivering, though, is going to be much more on the steps and approaches and strategy to get to that 100 by 100 capacity throughout the state, to just about everyone. We're also going to be talking about public-private partnerships quite a bit, because those are going to be relevant to this kind of work, and private partnerships can take all kinds of forms. So you'll see that as being the thrust of the work that we're going to deliver, with references back to the earlier piece. And then it's going to be a matter of a decision of priorities for you all to decide how much of the resources that you have, which are unprecedented, one-time resources going towards short-term needs, which are real, and longer term needs. We will also weigh in on the kinds of investments that could deliver short term, but would be higher cost, and that we might think are not necessarily good uses of dollars in the short term, but rather would be more effective, even if there's a slightly longer wait time for the long term. So we'll definitely get into those kinds of nuances.
And then as far as the long term, are you estimating any time frame to do things such as the expansion of fiber to reach that last mile?
Joanne, do you want to speak to that? That's more in the engineering and deployment side of things.
Yeah, we are. We are making estimates about what the timelines might look like with the appropriate consideration of things that are in flux and that are unknown, such as, for example, the fact that there is enormous pressure right now for and competition for both materials and labor. Now, this goes for long-term deployments, but also for shorter-term, quicker deployments. So if we're thinking about, for example, fast deployment of certain kinds of wireless networks, there are challenges with securing sufficient labor and sufficient equipment to do that very quickly as well. There's certainly the same set of challenges with regard to fiber, because we have, in the current moment, an unprecedented amount of federal money coming into this ecosystem, as well as private money. And everybody's competing for the same finite set of resources, and the market will accommodate that. It'll all expand over the next few years, but making anything happen in the very short term, there are a whole lot of question marks around it, and any promises anyone makes about being able to do something very fast, I think those promises should be enforceable and with considerable penalties if not met, because over-promising about timeline, given the moment we find ourselves in, is unfortunately a risk. And to put that in context, I speak with chief information officers for states and localities constantly who tell me they are getting countless calls from vendors offering them fast, cheap, easy solutions. If they will just put their rescue plan money into it, we can get a wireless network up in 6 months. We'll cover the entirety of a big metropolitan area. This will solve all your problems, etc., and it'll only be X number of dollars.
Heard this pitch.
It's
For sure.
It's a good moment for those who are marketing stuff. We take all of that into account in the document, and we make some recommendations about how we think that the state can protect its own interests and ensure that its money is going to build things that will actually be delivered on a realistic timeline, rather than one that is promised by a vendor, but is more marketing hype than reality. And we're very frank about the challenges on timeline right now, given the level of competition for resources of all kinds.
And
Let me ask one final question, and then I'll shut up, because I know I'm monopolizing all the time. And that is, have you and will you be looking at how fiber is actually done? In other words, looking at the alternatives. Should each individual company that's going to be an ISP be responsible for distributing, maintaining, and so on its own fiber? Or should the state look for more of a statewide solution, such as relying on distribution utilities to be the people who actually string the wire and maintain it long term? I'm continually struck by the notion that when a tree falls on the wire in the woods, do you send one truck out to fix it, or do you send two? Are you going to be looking at that at all?
Ideally, one would send one truck, certainly.
Snowshoes.
A wire in the woods, most likely there are not too many wires there. In rural areas, we're not going to have lots of different wires, because the economics don't point toward lots of competition. We're certainly looking at efficiency, and we're laying out alternative scenarios that in some cases would involve aggregation for efficiency purposes, and other cases would involve more localism in order to achieve some of the state's goals around localism that might be less efficient, but might involve more community input. And we lay that, we look at the implications of a number of different models in the document.
Okay, good. Thank you very much.
And we have, Senator, we have been in touch with Green Mountain Power, with folks involved with electric co-ops, with CUD leadership and all of those. So we're working our way through all those possible stakeholders.
Great. I can't wait to read the report.
Thank you.
Sandra Bray.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, Mr. Dunn, good to see you again,
Good to see you.
as always. So you've probably heard some of the design features we're looking for in the systems to be deployed. And I just run them by you, and just if you have thoughts on which ones are, desirable, not desirable, feasible, less feasible. So we've talked some about net neutrality, open access, a little bit about data capping, and also I think probably the most fundamental was universal service in any territory where a grant goes. Do you have any glosses on those? As
Well, we have many glosses on each of those, but what I say is that the complexity in the current environment right now around each one of those, both on a legal basis, where the FCC is going, and in terms of business plans and viability, are quite dynamic. And we have the good fortune of having a really great legal team that's a part of our consortium that's doing this, that includes Vermont Council as well as National Caliber Council. As someone who is not an attorney, who spent time like you writing laws, but not actually being an attorney, I would not want to opine on any of those until I get that feedback from them. But I would just say that each one of those is really complicated. And it's not as simple as I, as a broadband advocate in the past, might have even thought. And so really understanding those parameters as you're evaluating things like risk tolerance, as well as the willingness for partners to be to participate given certain conditions, it's going to be important to really think through all of those pieces. So that's my only. I'm continuing to be on a learning curve on each one. Joanne's team has had deep experience in this, but again, we also have a really great legal team that will be making some recommendations around at least the thorniest of those.
Okay, well, thanks. I mean, I think the other.
Joanne,
sure, please. Great.
Joanne, would you add to that?
No, I said Sandra Bray had another question.
No, I didn't realize Ms. Hovis was ready to say something. I'm happy to
okay,
stay quiet and
Joanne,
keep listening.
You're down in the bottom corner right now.
Thank you, senators. I would just add to what Matt has said that all of those requirements inevitably involve certain kinds of trade-offs because they change the economics of a network, right. Whether it's a network owned and operated by a CUD or one that is owned by a CUD and operated by their partner. And the terms of that partnership and the form of operations that the CUD delivers, there are costs associated with certain things and associated challenges, as well as considerable benefits. So we analyze these all in the report, but I think there's also a degree to which we may recommend that you allow the communities themselves, if they become the means by which you distribute this funding, to determine whether these are priorities for them as well and how to negotiate them, how to enact them. You can do it at the state level, or you can leave it to your communities to do so. And because they involve costs and therefore risks, it may be appropriate to get that kind of input or to allow them to make some of that call. These are all incredibly desirable policy outcomes with enormously important implications for long-term use of the internet. But none of the kinds of things we want is ever free when we look at the economics of a network that has to function in a market over a long period of time.
Right. Well, I was thinking, with 4 features, that's 16 different possible combinations. And so then, I also say, well, amongst all those, would we prioritize? Because if all 4 would sync, most might discourage most applicants from taking grant money if all 4 conditions applied. Does some combination of other ones still make it viable for them? And if so, which ones? And then how might we prioritize those in order to get the best result that has enough people applying so that we see success in the end? Thanks.
Hardy.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks, Joanne and Matt. It's nice to see you both here again. I missed the beginning because I had to be in appropriations, but I believe your report is due to the department in June. Is that correct?
First draft is I believe May 10th. I believe that's right. So we will have a draft out that we will feel good about the data. It won't be finalized, right? We set out a cadence to this, but you should have it by May 10th that will address a number of the issues that you are asking about with our confidence in the data and that analysis and a legal review.
Okay. So I apologize if this was already asked or if you answered this before I got here, but given that, that's nice to hear that we might have at least a draft to look at before we go home, for whatever that means, since we're already home. But I'm assuming, at least you, Matt, have looked a little bit at H360 and the sort of direction that it's going in. Is there anything that we're doing that you think is going to be glaringly different? I heard your your recommendation about the oversight or the administration of the program. I get that, but are there other things that seems to be going in a glaringly different direction that you would say stop right now from doing that? I don't want to put you in an awkward spot, but the timeline is such that we will have already probably passed this bill by the time we get even the draft. And it's unfortunate that we couldn't have synced it more.
I agree. And look, I've been in your seat, not that literal one, but I've been in the same position, and I wish we knew the legislative calendar necessarily, and likewise. Here's what I would say is that the legislation that you are considering right now, I don't think, and taking aside the issue of structure for deployment of resources and regulation, and just setting that aside, it feels very much like an extension of the trajectory that the state has been going for the last several years anyway. And we are doing this report with that general trajectory in mind, that 100 over 100 is the goal of the state and wanting to get there quickly, that getting to every single person in the state is the objective. That the mechanism for deploying that capital is most preferred through localized entities like CUDs for a variety of set of values that I think you all have deliberated over a number of legislatures, and that the desire to do that and do it quickly, that there is urgency, particularly coming out of COVID. So those are all things that we are taking as sort of fundamental givens. It still does not make the task of actually getting to 100 by 100 to the whole state easy, but we're definitely. I don't think there is a jarring difference between what we've been working on and what's in at least the House version. I haven't been there for all of your deliberations or know if there is a significant shift from that. But that's anyway. I hope that answers the question without getting too far out over our skis.
Yes, I think so. I mean, you don't see any glaring problems like, please, no, don't do that kind of issues. At least, and I'm glad to hear that you haven't suffered through all of our meetings.
It was sausage making at the finest.
Yes,
No.
I know you know how it goes.
Yes.
But thank you. No, that's helpful to just give a sort of general idea.
The thing that I would say, though, to Joanne's last point that came out of Senator Bray's comments is that we don't think, given the RDOF funding and the federal funding and the players who are out there who are doing things in real time right now, that there is going to be a one size fits all for the entire state. And I would say, that you will likely find, and again, we need to make sure we have legal review before we get through this, that there will be a recommendation for providing some flexibility in negotiation on the dollars to be able to get to 100 over 100. And it could be, along the kinds of parameters that Senator Bray was talking about. So that wasn't embedded, as I understood, in the legislation that came over from the House. And I think there is going to be a lot of nuance. And I think the CUDs will be needing a lot of support, right? I think the CUDs are not all in the same stage of development. They don't all have the same stage of staffing and sophistication. EC Fiber is in a very different place than the CUD in Franklin County. I mean, it's just they're different. And I guess my only other comment that I would make is that if that value of wanting CUDs to be in the driver's seat for a chunk of this is real, to make sure that there are also real resources, which could be centralized, could be distributed, it doesn't matter. So that they're going to be able to do that kind of planning and in many cases, negotiating to make sure that they're fulfilling their goals and mandate. Because that's not for the faint of heart and for the unprepared. So that would, I guess, that would be something that I would share as you're going into this the process of figuring out in broad strokes how these resources should be deployed.
Thank you.
Matt, Joanne, if I'm hearing you correctly, you're saying if we want to go forward and use CUDs, that we need and we found it out last year, despite all the plans, if you can't get cable and you can't get anyone to string it, it's not going to get strung. So be realistic about timeframes and about the reality of the market. And perhaps starting out, we need to put money initially into perhaps training more people to string cable or and setting up the structure with all the supports. And I think we've come to realize that there's a broad range and there are supports and there are folks out there. And if you are just a community volunteer, that I can get your entire town wired in 3 weeks for X million dollars might sound pretty appealing. Mm-hmm. So we're going to have that kind, and we've already talked about that, but then you get strung up in the romance of having 100 to every hollow in Vermont in 6 months. And I think we can lose sight of reality. And then I think heard you say that have some flexibility, and we've talked about this. We talked about it last year. Do you tell the folks, well, we can get you 100 in 3 years, but your local cable company could run a line up to your house in 3 months? Do we tell them? And I know Senator McDonald is going to have a heart failure, but do we tell them you have to wait 5 years, or should we allow the locals the flexibility of saying, this is our plan. We're going to do this section of town now. The wire is, the cable's there. We're going to get them 25/3, and then we're going to build out in, within 10 years, we'll get everybody 100. Is that kind of what I'm hearing?
I'm sure. Let me address you. You hit 3 different things.
Yes, I'm good at that.
One is that, and this is somewhat aside from the work that we're doing, but anything that you can do similar to the partnership that's been started with VTC and can be invested in more to build the talent pool to be able to do this deployment, who, by the way, will have lots of job options once they get that skill set, is going to be really, really valuable and have payoff in the end. So please do not lose sight of that, because that's a reality. The second piece that I would say, though, and again, I don't think I'm getting too out ahead, is that the kind of funding that you're getting from the federal government, again, is once in a lifetime. And while some solutions may take a little longer than others, you have set out that you want to get to 100 over 100, and I would keep an eye on that ball. That's what is going to be future proof. That's not going to lead to this same conversation of a divide in 5 years. I mean, all the research that's been done shows that the speed of broadband needs are going up 30% per year. Right. And so right now it's, if you have 5 people in a household like we do, you really need 20 megabits up to not have things start to break down, especially when everyone else on the road is using their broadband at the same time. And that's going to continue to escalate quite quickly over a period. And so you don't want to end up in the same place. So I think there is a moment now where you can make just a step function leap for folks who have, for the 68,000 some odd premises who are underserved by the federal definition, to have essentially future-proof kinds of infrastructure.
Okay, committee, the auditor has joined us, and we are now 5 minutes late. Senator McDonald, I see your hand.
Okay, I'm just always the caboose here, but you want to move on?
I know, I'm marginalizing you, Senator. The floor is yours.
So, Matt, we got a few weeks to make our initial moves here. And the committee seems to have agreed that we should devote the grants to the under and unserved areas. And how we define them is also important, because this problem we're tackling is similar to tackling electricity. Electricity did not go to places that were unprofitable. And we are trying to target our 100 to 100 grants to the places that are unprofitable. And we're trying to define what is unprofitable, which is kind of a amorphous task, in a way that is measurable. And we've sort of agreed that unprofitable is areas that now have no service or are underserved with 4.1, And certainly any place that has fiber today is profitable or wouldn't have fiber. And now we are arguing over whether we would spend money to push out 25.3 to where it doesn't exist, or whether we would reject that and say, by definition, 25.3 is profitable, because if it wasn't 25.3, it got built because it was profitable. And we would not send any of this grant money for the next 3 or 4 years to those areas. We would simply send it to places that are below 25.3. Is that a good starting point if we can craft how the issues that you have said about CUDs being of different experience, different geography, different demographics, different, meeting different challenges? But is that a good starting point to go to the unprofitable first with this slug of money?
Senator, I think what you just said is aligned with the sentiment that I just shared, which is those are the places where you could do a step function shift for the long term. And if you're going to be prioritizing public dollars, in most cases that will certainly make sense. I think you may recall in the issue of some islands in some places from the report that we put
Marshall
out.
Islands, yeah.
Marshall, very, very small islands. So I don't want to put an absolute, but I think you're in the same general place that we are in terms of where the priority should be, given those other caveats. So yeah, I mean, I think we're in the same.
The second half of the question is there's been the House has recommended that we empower CUDs, provided they have the proper guidance and oversight, to enter into contracts, negotiations to bring these high speed, the 100 and 100 to their unprofitable areas that they serve.
Mm-hmm.
And we've been asked to provide a level playing field for the for-profits. Well, should we consider allowing smaller utilities and isolated areas not covered by CUB territories, the same options to negotiate with people who will build out there, regardless of who they are, provided that the grants would have the same requirements for levels of service and degrees of open access or neutrality that were afforded to CUDs. Would that cover all those unserved areas on a level playing field with those sorts of conditions?
So as I think I understand your question, is for the 5,000 or so premises that are unserved or underserved and are not in a CUD, and I think that number is approximate. We can certainly verify that. Whether or not those individual municipalities should be left outside of a CUD structure to negotiate on their own, is that
if they were to be permitted to get grants and were to negotiate on their own with the same players that the CUDs were negotiating with, that they should be eligible for grants, provided that what they negotiated for were under the same rules as what the CUDs were negotiating for, and that they were overseen similarly to the CUDs to see that the deals that they're working out, the arrangements they're working out, are lawful under are subject to the same conditions.
Sure. So, Senator, I would say that this is one of the areas that we are in deep discussion about how to advise. And
How to meet that suggestion, or an alternative?
Well, yeah. How to know what our recommendation would be, and I don't say that in a flip way or a way to avoid it, because the fact is that negotiating, particularly if you allow for the kinds of flexibility that I think you're going to, see us allowing for, with, large carriers or small carriers or anyone else who are going to be involved in this, is not easy, is complicated, has a lot of legal parameters, and your leverage is a lot smaller when you are smaller. And so we are, what you'll see in this draft plan that we're still putting the piece together around this, what we hope is a clarifying discussion about that continuum of capacity, and whether or not we certainly think that if the decision is to go down the CUD route, providing as much opportunity as possible for communities to join those CUDs. I think there's 40 some odd that have not. Some of them won't, like Springfield, Vermont, that already has fiber to every home and premise, and I think that's going to be fine. But I think you will. I think there could be some advantage of saying, look, if you're going to be going into this negotiation, you need some economies of scale around the number of people, much less the
That wasn't,
capacity. Joanne, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
no, that's.
And we're going to have to wrap this up.
Yes, Madam Chair, the different entities that are not under CUDs are not under CUDs because of demographics and size and profitability. Looking
Are we
forward to your
talking
report.
about private telephone companies, amongst others?
There's no reason why what I'm proposing, Madam Chair, is a private telephone company could enter into a
That's-
partnership with
Yes.
another for-profit, provided that it met the same threshold and conditions that a CUD would have going
Yes,
to.
that's what I thought you were referring
okay.
to.
So looking forward to the report, and thank you for your answers, Matt. And thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, Joanne, did you have one last thing to offer?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just aligned with that thought is, I think, I'm in agreement with Matt that where there is scale, there are likely to be better outcomes for the state. And that's the advantage of the CUDs, that small towns are not in a position of negotiating just as a small town, but they've aggregated themselves. And one of our potential recommendations that we are working through now, and we are likely to recommend, is that for those areas where there are not CUDs, but there are unserved premises, that those areas be aggregated and the state undertake an effort to get the solution in place, which could very likely be a partnership with a private entity. That might be a private telephone company or might be another entity. There are a wide range of different interested entities, but that aggregation would be the benefit. And, and I think this is a partial answer also to the question that Senator Brock asked me earlier about the capabilities of the department. And I want to be sure that I'm clear when I say, I think that the state of Vermont has the capabilities to do this, as does the Department of Public Service. While I haven't investigated its grant-making experience, you should know as a state that you are widely respected for having the best broadband map at the state level in the country and some of the most sophisticated analysis and the best data. And even your neighboring states don't come anywhere close to that. I think you're going to be able to do at the state level a lot of very important work in partnership with your CUDs as well as with the private sector.
Thank you. That's always a good note to end on.
And if anyone, including Senator Brock, does have questions or things that they would want to have us consider as part of the overall piece, we can't promise responses to everything, but we welcome that input. We've been doing public outreach events in a variety of ways, and please, we appreciate the depth of thought and work that you all are putting into it in understanding this once in a lifetime opportunity. So, thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for coming in and giving us a preliminary glimpse. If at any time you think we are running afoul of something you're going to be recommending, just you can give me a heads up, just so that we all end up as close as possible to the same place and with a kind of joint idea of where we're going.
Will do.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. We are going. Yes, to Caitlyn Jenner's just announced she's running for the governor of California. That's what's replaced my agenda. We are now going on to the state auditor, Doug Hoffer. Doug's with us. I think you had a request to go on miscellaneous tax or wherever we can, where we can find a place to put it, but an oversight, and I will turn it over to you, Mr. Hoffer, and you can tell us what you need.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Okay, good. It looks like you've had a long and complicated day. I'm going to try to make it easy for you. This is not about the complex substance of TIF, and what I'm asking you to consider has nothing to do with any TIF district in the state except Burlington. That's it. It's a timing issue that is the result of a number of changes in the last 8 years, some of which I think were unintended. Back in 2013, after the work that was begun under my predecessor, the same person did it, my chief auditor, Tanya. As you know, we did a number of audits of the then extant TIF districts, Milton, Burlington, and Winooski, and that led to you and your colleagues making some changes, a part of which was work between my office, primarily my deputy, Susan Messner at the time, with VEPSI, to put together a schedule for when all of the existing and then future TIF districts would be audited. And in every single case, the recommendation, which we agreed with, was 3 times in their life cycle. However, those 3 towns that I mentioned were created prior to 2006. It was an entirely different regime. And at that time, we thought that Burlington, the end of Burlington's retention period was 2020. So since the new rules that were in process were not going to take effect until 2015, everybody sort of said, well, an extra 4 or 5 years for Burlington being the end, what we thought at that time would be the end of their process, no big deal. Well, as it turned out, you guys subsequently extended Burlington's retention period to 2025. And then again, more recently to what could be as late as 2035. Now, what's happened is that Milton has gone through the entire process. We did an audit a year and a half ago or so on Milton, and they're done. Although they have 2 TIF districts, the one that started early is done. Winooski has had 2 out of 3. Burlington has only had 1, and it's been 10 years. And if we stick with the schedule that's in statute, that is not a result of the negotiation between VEPSI and my office, they will effectively go a quarter century with no audits, which doesn't make any sense for a variety of reasons, because it is the biggest and most complex TIF district in the state. And fairness alone argues that they all should be done to the same schedule. So all I'm asking you to do is reconsider that provision and give some thought to allowing us to give you some draft language, which I don't have with me today, that would require that first Burlington TIF district, Burlington Waterfront, to be audited soon.
I think the committee may have gotten it. You sent it to me, and I'm pretty sure I sent it to Faith. If I didn't, I will. It should either be on our website, or I think the email got forwarded to the committee, but
Okay,
don't hold me to that, but we'll get it to everyone.
Okay, I want to be clear about one other thing. We, of course, in statute have the authority to audit Burlington's TIF anytime we choose, because it involves the Ed Fund. However, under the TIF statute, Burlington would be required to pay the cost of that audit. If not, that cost would be subsumed in our general internal service fund, which is paid for by all of state government. And I think you folks wisely said that these TIF audits should be paid for by the towns. So I'm not sure why Burlington should get a break here, but just to let you know, it's not like we can't do the work, but it would be a big chunk.
Senator Pearson?
Thank you, Mr. Hoffer. Nice to see you. there's two TIF districts in Burlington, and you're only talking about the waterfront. But as I understand it, leading up to your arrival here today, generated at least one phone call to me. So I gather there's some concern that they would be potentially overlapping those two audits, and that's stressful on a workload for the city. So could you just let us know if you're able to, the timing on the other district audit and how you mean to approach, and if we entertain your language, is it reasonable to make it clear to the city that they wouldn't be overlapping, or could you just address that sort of workload issue from the city's point of view?
Yeah, happy to. They would not be overlapping. How's that?
Okay. How would we?
They'd be continuous.
the endless Hoffer audit. Would we be able to? Could you help us think of a way to just make that clear? And
well, we have a schedule that was agreed to with VEPSI. Right?
So what was that, 2025 or something? I think
that's when the downtown audit, which is the one we're talking about, or the waterfront audit, excuse me, was not expected for us to do it until 25. But the way the statute is written, it's at the end of their retention period. So that could be adjusted if Burlington goes out to 35 or near that time. Then it could be literally, 15 years without an audit. The other one is scheduled to be done soon, but we would never want to go into the city. I mean, that's just disrespectful. It's a lot of work to do this job on the city's part in responding to our information requests and so forth. So by all means, I'm happy to assure anyone who asked that they would not be overlapping.
Thank you.
Okay, Senator Hardy, did I see?
Yes, Madam Chair. And thank you, Mr. Hoffer. I just want a clarification. I assumed that you have authority to audit whenever you want, right? You did say that. So it's not about the authority to do it. It's about who pays for it more. Is that right? And if you just do it on your own schedule, then your office would pay for it. And if you do it on a legislatively mandated schedule related to the TIF program, then the city would pay for it. Is that correct?
That is correct. But when you say our office would pay for it, understand that all of our performance auditing is part of the single audit revolving fund, which is approved both
right
and finance and management. And that cost would then be distributed to and shared by all of the entities within state government, which was not your intent when this program of continuous audits was developed about 5 years ago.
Okay. Thanks for that clarification.
Thank you.
Okay. And you don't care where we put this?
No, my new deputy informed me that either 436 or 437 seemed like a suitable place to park one of these.
Apologize to your new deputy. I just got this email from Tim. I know at least 3 who have changed jobs in the last few months.
I will.
So I had to ask him, which Tim are you? And I got told. So so he says 336 or 337. All right.
It was 436 and 437, I think.
Okay. 436 and 437. All right. Those are gotta be house bills. We don't get that high.
Again,
all right.
This would have no impact on any other TIF district in the state.
Okay. All right. Committee, any other questions? Okay, if not, we're gonna move on. We're actually 5 minutes ahead. So we don't have a break scheduled today because it's the end of the session. Senator Bray, you're going to use up the break time, I was about to
No, I just had a quick question for Mr. Hoffer. I didn't know how orientation was going for his new deputy, if that was working out or not, or.
Okay, can you do that offline? Because I'm going to give you a 10-minute break and you're free to stay on. But I think we've been sitting for a while and we could use a couple minutes.
Well, I appreciate you.
Ending live.